What did medieval people really snack on when they were starving, broke, or in a hurry? So before you get comfortable, take a moment. Likes and subscribes help me keep making these. Where are you listening from? Drop your city and time in the comments. I'm always reading them thinking, wait, people in England listen to history stories to sleep. Okay, tonight we're talking about what medieval junk food was like. But before we go anywhere, get cosy. Pillows good, blanket situation handled, perfect. Trust me on this one. Tonight you ease into the story the way you ease into a soft pillow. Slowly, gently, and with a faint hope that nothing in this medieval snack lineup will upset your stomach. Because as you walk with me through these dim, narrow streets, where everything smells vaguely of wood smoke, old ale, and someone's dinner burning, you realise something comforting. Humans have always loved snacks. Even when life was hard, roofs were leaky, and water had a 30% chance of ruining your week, people still wanted something warm, sweet, and just greasy enough to feel like a celebration. You walk past stalls made of rough planks, wedged so close together the roofs practically shake hands in the middle. Someone is shouting about fish, someone else is shouting about bread. But over there, near a barrel that's definitely on fire in a non-regulation way, you smell it. That warm, sugary, slightly questionable aroma that only medieval ambition could create. Apple fritters. These were the pride of the streets, the not-quite donuts of a world before refrigeration, sprinkles, or even the basic idea that oil shouldn't be the same colour as old parchment. Apple fritters in the medieval world were tiny, hot pockets of hope. They were everything your normal meals were not. Sweet, fun, and mercifully free of cabbage. You watch as a woman, face flushed from the heat, hair tied back with a scrap of cloth, cut apples that are definitely not the shiny supermarket kind. These apples look like they have seen things. They grew crooked on wild branches, collected wind scars and maybe survived a bird attack or two, but they were perfect for fritters. Tart, sharp, alive with flavour. She drops them into a bowl of batter that looks suspiciously thin. The batter isn't fancy. Flour, eggs, maybe a splash of ale because water is, well, medieval water. Nobody fully trusts it. Ale, on the other hand, is basically emotional support liquid at this point. Then comes the deeping, which is an old word for frying but honestly sounds more dramatic than it needs to. The pot is filled with pig fat, reused so many times it should have its own surname. It bubbles ominously, as if warning the apples of their fate. You watch her scoop a dripping clump of batter and apple into the hot fat. It crackles like it's yelling. Within moments that little blob turns golden brown, crisp at the edges, soft in the middle. She flips it with a stick, definitely not a proper utensil, and gives you a look like, you want one? You do? Obviously. The first bite burns your tongue a little. That's the law of fritters. They're always hotter than you think. But then the taste spreads. Sweet, tart, warm. With just the faintest hint that the oil might be older than the town itself. You can't even complain. You're too busy chewing. If you're rich, and let's be honest, you're probably not. You might get a dusting of imported sugar. If not, a drizzle of honey does the job and feels luxurious enough that for a moment you forget you're standing in mud. Kids chase each other around the stall. Adults pretend they're only buying fritters for the children. Birds plot crimes from the rooftops. It's chaotic, cheerful, and very human. And just when you finish that fritter, warm and sweet in your hands, you walk a little farther down the street, because medieval snacking does not stop at fried fruit. Oh no. Welcome to cheese curds, the medieval equivalent of popcorn, if popcorn was slightly squeaky and made from baby animal stomach science. They weren't fancy. They weren't even intentionally invented. Cheesemakers would separate milk into curds and whey using rennet, an enzyme found inside the stomach lining of a calf, lamb or goat. Delicious, right? But it worked, and the curds that floated up became these tiny clusters of dairy joy, fresh, springy, salty, inconsistent as the weather. Some were soft, some were rubbery, some were one bad day away from being used as a projectile, but people loved them. You could carry them in a pouch, snack on them while walking, or toss them to a friend without worrying anything would break. Not even the cheese. As you walk with a handful of warm curds and the lingering sweetness of fritters still on your tongue, you feel it. Medieval junk food wasn't glamorous, but it was comforting. It made life easier, softer, a little more human. You move farther through the crowded market, feeling the hum of daily life softening around you. The sound of merchants shouting fades into something more like a lullaby when you hear it from a distance. Muffled, rhythmic, almost sleepy. You walk between stalls where baskets overflow with earthy vegetables, where bolts of wool hang like old clouds, and where spices cling to the air in warm, fragrant ribbons. But you know exactly what you're looking for. The next medieval snack. Something a little odd, a little indulgent, and somehow still beloved by people who thought bathing once a month was ambitious. You stop near a wooden cart with wheels that look like they'd come off if someone exhaled too hard. The vendor is stirring something thick and bubbling in a pot, squinting into the rising steam like he's negotiating with it. You get closer, and the scent hits you, sweet, buttery, and faintly burnt. It's roasted nuts, one of the most common street snacks in medieval towns. Not the glossy sugar-coated kind you get at Christmas markets today. No, medieval roasted nuts were rustic. They were tossed in honey, rolled in spices, and then roasted until they were either delicious or dangerously close to fossilizing. You stand there as he scoops a ladleful into a wooden bowl. Almonds, if you're wealthy. Walnuts, if you're normal. Hazelnuts, if you're lucky, or living somewhere where hazels actually grow and people haven't already stripped the trees clean. You take a bite. It's crunchy, sweet, slightly smoky, like eating a campfire that someone politely seasoned. You keep walking, popping them into your mouth one by one, letting your teeth break through that caramelized shell. The warmth spreads through your chest, slow and steady, making you feel like maybe medieval life wasn't all mud and tragedy. But then the smell changes again. This time, meat. The kind that's been freshly roasted, heavily salted and optimistically labelled safe to eat. Welcome to the world of medieval meat skewers. They called it kebab in some places, brochettes in others, and occasionally just street meat, which feels honest. You watch a man slice off pieces of pork and thread them onto a stick. The meat sizzles over a fire that looks like it's been burning for 3 days straight. Some pieces are charred, some are suspiciously pink, but everything is heavily seasoned with spices like cumin or black pepper. Expensive, yes, but used sparingly enough that nobody could accuse you of showing off. You try one, it's salty, very salty. Medieval meat was kept in barrels of salty. But it hits the spot. It's warm, smoky, chewy, comforting. And as you eat, you hear two men arguing over whether this particular stall got its meat from an actual butcher or from a pig that simply fell. You decide not to think about it. Deeper into the market, you find something more mysterious. A little stand specialising in fried doughs. Not fritters. Those are for people who want sweetness. This is more bread-like, more savoury. A kind of proto-snack that fills your stomach in a way that makes you think someone should have invented dipping sauces centuries earlier. These dough balls are flavoured with herbs, garlic, maybe cheese if someone was feeling rebellious. They're fried in the same eternal pot of oil that the fritters used, but somehow the taste is completely different. Earthy, bready, still too hot but impossible to wait for. You pop one in your mouth, and it burns the roof of your tongue exactly the way every delicious food does. You stay there for a moment, letting the warmth of the food settle you, listening to the crackle of oil, the murmured chatter, the uneven rhythm of life around you. It's calming in its own strange way, like the world has steadied itself just enough for you to drift with it. Then you head toward one of the quieter corners of the market. Fewer people, more shadows. Here, tucked between stalls of dried fish and coarse cloth, is a little table selling something surprisingly modern. Candied seeds. Think sesame brittle, but sharper, crunchier, and more medieval. Seeds held together with honey, shaped into little squares. They're tiny, simple, portable, and surprisingly addictive. You bite into one and it snaps like twigs underfoot. The honey melts on your tongue. And suddenly you understand why medieval children ran around buzzing with energy. This stuff is basically the ancestor of every snack bar ever made. As you walk, the slow, warm haze of food and noise wraps around you like a blanket. Every stall, every scent, every bite pulls you deeper into the medieval world. Not the grim, muddy version we often imagine, but the softer, human one. The world where people laughed, snacked, gathered, and found joy in things that were warm, sweet, and good. And just as the market begins to quiet, Just as your steps grow slower and more settled, you feel yourself ready to drift to the next stage of this sleepy, delicious journey.
You wander away from the market's busiest lane, letting the noise thin into something softer, still lively, still human, but no longer pressing in on you from every direction. The sky overhead is a washed-out grey, the kind that always feels a little damp, even when it isn't actively raining. You move toward a row of stalls clinging to the town's old defensive wall, the stones behind them cool and mossy. Here, the food gets stranger, less snack, more. Why would anyone eat that? But remember, this is medieval junk food, which means it didn't always need to make sense. It just needed to be edible, or close enough. You stop at a small table, run by a man who looks like he hasn't slept since the last harvest. He's selling pies. Technically, you watch him cut into one, and the crust cracks like brittle parchment. Steam spills out, carrying the unmistakable scent of meat, not beef, not pork, too precious for casual snacking. No, this is small game pie, the medieval version of grabbing something quick and hoping it doesn't taste exactly like the forest floor. His pies are filled with rabbit, pigeon, maybe squirrel, if the morning hunt was a disaster. You try a bite because you're brave, and also because this story demands it. The crust is uneven, crispy in some spots, underdone in others, but the filling is warm, peppery, and far better than you expected. It tastes like someone tried their best with whatever they caught before breakfast. You keep walking, passing another stall where a woman stirs a pot of something sticky and dark. She ladles a spoonful into a little wooden bowl and hands it to a child, who slurps it eagerly. Curiosity wins, so you ask what it is. She smiles and says, treacle, but not the sweet, lovely treacle you're imagining. This is medieval treacle, a thick, molasses-like syrup made from boiling down sugar scraps, fruit remnants, and sometimes herbs. It's messy, it's bold, and it tastes like caramel that made some questionable choices. You dip a finger into the bowl and taste it. Sweet, sharp, slightly smoky. You can almost feel the energy hit your bloodstream. It's the type of snack that makes kids run faster, and adults suddenly talk louder. A few steps later, you stumble onto one of the more controversial medieval snacks, dried fish bites. These were the ultimate grab-and-go for towns near rivers or coasts. You watch as a fishmonger snaps off a piece of dried cod, the way someone today might break a chocolate bar. It's salty, too salty, but that's the point. Without refrigeration, salt was life. You chew slowly. It's tough, leathery, but strangely satisfying. The kind of snack you eat because everyone else is eating it, and after a while your taste buds surrender. You meander onward, passing groups of people lounging near the wall, nibbling things from small cloth pouches, seeds, nuts, bits of dried fruit. Simple, cheap, endlessly portable. A medieval trail mix, minus the chocolate and the occasional rock-hard raisin. The simplicity of it all feels oddly calming, like life was hard enough, and snacks didn't need to be complicated too. As you finish your little dried fish adventure, the sun shifts behind a bank of clouds, and a cool breeze moves down the street. You breathe it in, savoring the mix of hearth smoke, herbs, and something sweet lingering from the treacle stall. Every bite so far, every noisy, sticky, salty one, has drawn you deeper into this easy, steady rhythm of medieval life. No hurry, no rush, just everyday people, using food to make the world feel a little more manageable. And before you know it, you're ready to follow the smell of something new drifting your way, something warm, nutty, and unmistakably medieval. You follow that warm smell as it winds between the uneven rows of homes and workshops, tugging you toward a line of vendors set up along a narrow back street. Here, things feel quieter, like you've wandered into the medieval version of a side alley, where locals grab their favourite guilty pleasures away from the eyes of church officials who absolutely would not approve. And that smell, it's roasted barley cakes. These little rounds were the unsung heroes of medieval snacking, simple, filling, and just sweet enough to feel indulgent. You watch as a woman scoops a handful of mashed barley mixed with honey and spices, pats it into a rough disc, and tosses it onto a flat iron pan set over a bed of coals. The cake sizzles softly, turning golden at the edges, the scent blooming into something warm and nutty. When she hands you one,
It nearly burns your fingertips. You blow on it, take a bite, and feel the gentle crunch give way to a soft, warm center. It tastes like comfort. Humble, honest comfort. You drift farther, finding a group of young apprentices gathered around a stall selling hot spiced wine. Or the medieval knockoff version of mulled wine anyway. It's cheap, barely alcoholic, and heated in a pot that looks like it hasn't been scrubbed since the last king died. However, the aroma is incredible. Cloves, cinnamon, and perhaps a hint of orange peel, if the cellar is feeling generous. You sip it, letting the warmth roll slowly across your tongue. It's cozy, calming, the kind of drink that makes your whole body soften just a fraction. Across the way, another vendor is selling what he proudly calls fridge cheese rolls. You watch him flatten a lump of cheese curd, wrap it in dough, and then drop it, carefully into hot fat. The finished roll crackles as he hands it to you. The first bite is molten cheese and crispy dough, the second bite richer, saltier, almost too addictive. You can't help but imagine medieval teenagers blowing their allowance on these after a long day sweeping out stables or hauling buckets of water. You keep moving, spotting families clustered around a pot of thick stew that served more like a snack than a meal, just a ladleful into a cup, something to warm your hands while you walk. The stew is simple: beans, herbs, a scrap of meat, if fortune smiled, but comforting in that. I've eaten this 1,000 times and never get tired of it. Why? You sip it, feeling the warmth seep into your ribs like a slow exhale. Then, in a tiny corner of the alley, you find something unexpected: fruit pastes. Not candy, though they come close, but thick sheets of boiled fruit pulp sweetened with honey and dried until they can be cut into neat slices. Plum, pear, even quince, if you're lucky. You try one. It's chewy, fragrant, surprisingly bright for something made with no sugar and even less hope. You chew slowly, letting the flavor linger, and as you stand there, tasting the quiet sweetness of medieval fruit candy, you realize something soothing. For all the chaos and hardship of medieval life, snacks gave people small pockets of joy, something warm in their hands, something sweet on their tongue, something normal in a world that didn't always feel steady. You take a breath, let the calm settle around you, and step deeper into this sleepy world of ancient cravings. You drift out of the narrow side street and back into a wider, livelier part of town. The gear here feels brighter somehow, carrying the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer and the soft chatter of people finishing their errands. You walk slowly, letting the rhythm of footsteps, voices and wind settle around you like a blanket, and then you catch a scent that makes you pause. One of those warm, toasty smells that hits you right behind the eyes. Roasted grains. This is the medieval version of those popcorn carts you pass in modern city plazas, only instead of corn kernels popping cheerfully, it's grains like wheat, barley, or oats being tumbled in a pan over hot coals, until they darken, crisp, and release a nutty aroma, so comforting you feel your shoulders drop a little. A young boy scoops a handful into a small linen pouch and hands it to you with the seriousness of someone delivering a royal decree. You taste a few kernels. Crunchy, smoky, warm, a little bitter in a pleasant way, like the medieval ancestor of a snack mix. It's simple, grounding, something to chew on as you wander through the rest of the day. A few steps ahead, a fisherman's wife is selling dried eel strips. Yes, eel strips. You watch her expertly slice the long silver fish before laying the pieces on a grate over low heat. They curl slightly as they dry, turning glossy and leathery. You take one because you're committed to this journey. It's chewy, intensely so, but the flavor is rich, salty, and oddly satisfying. You imagine medieval dockworkers gnawing on these during long days hauling cargo, and you can't help but admire their dedication. You continue down the street and find yourself in front of a baker's stall. But this isn't the big loaves for dinner kind of baker. This one specializes in small luxuries. He's selling tiny honey cakes, little round bites made from coarse flour, sweetened with honey, and sprinkled with herbs like sage or rosemary. Fresh from the oven, they're soft and warm, steam rising in gentle curls. You pop one into your mouth. It melts almost instantly, leaving a floral sweetness.
that lingers at the back of your throat. The baker watches your reaction with a look that says he knows exactly what he's doing. Around the corner, you spot a crowd gathered around a tall wooden barrel. A young woman stands on a stool, ladling out what looks like tiny round dumplings. Only when you get closer, you realize these are fried pea balls. Yes, peas. Mashed, mixed with breadcrumbs, seasoned, and fried until crispy, high protein, cheap. Weirdly addictive. Medieval students ate these constantly. You try one, then two, then you lose count. And then comes one of the strangest but most beloved medieval snacks, hemp seed bites. No, not that kind of hemp. These seeds were roasted, lightly salted, and eaten by everyone from farmhands to monks. They crackle pleasantly between your teeth, leaving an earthy, nutty taste. The kind of snack you could eat by the handful without realizing it. You wander a bit farther, watching the day settle into evening. Torches are being lit one by one, the smell of smoke curls through the cooling air. People laugh as they move through the streets, hands full of warm rolls, dried fruit, roasted nuts, whatever they manage to pick up along the way. It's strangely peaceful, this moment of shared ordinary life, and as you walk you realize medieval junk food wasn't just about the food, it was about pausing, about grabbing something warm and simple, because it made the day easier. The sun has dipped behind the rooftops now, leaving the town wrapped in a gentle dimness that feels more calming than dark. Lanterns sway softly from wooden beams, their warm glow shimmering over the marketplace. It's that perfect hour where everything slows just a little. Voices grow softer, footsteps lighter, and food somehow tastes better, simply because you're tired enough to savor it. You follow the glow toward a stand selling one of medieval Europe's most chaotic snacks, spiced chickpea fritters. The vendor, a wiry man with a perpetual squint, scoops chickpea batter from a wooden bowl and drops spoonfuls into hot oil. The fritters puff instantly, hissing like startled cats, and turn golden within seconds. He sprinkles them with herbs as he hands them to customers. You take one, crispy exterior, soft, savory interior, a little salty, a little earthy, incredibly warm. You feel it settle in your stomach like a friendly stone. Right beside him, another vendor is selling something called cracknels. These are little hard biscuits, so hard they could probably break a tooth if you weren't careful. But dip them in warm milk or spiced wine, and suddenly they soften just enough to be pleasant. They're lightly sweet, delicately spiced, and satisfyingly crunchy. You try one dry and immediately understand why people dunked them. A few stalls away, you find a pot of warm, sticky milk, simmering with honey and herbs. Children crowd around with wooden cups. This drink, sometimes called posset, was a bedtime treat, a little luxury that soothed both the stomach and the spirit. You take a sip. It's rich, sweet, and velvety. Something inside you unclenches. Then you spot something far more familiar. Early medieval pancakes. They're not fluffy or light. Those are centuries away, but thin, uneven cakes made from flour, eggs, and sometimes ale. The cook flips them with a knife, folds them into quarters, and drizzles them with honey. You take one and bite in. Warm, simple, comforting, like a sleepy hug from the past. As you continue walking, you see a group gathered around a small fire pit roasting chestnuts. Their shells crack softly as they heat, revealing the creamy insides. Someone hands you one straight from the coals, wrapped in cloth, so you don't burn your fingers. The flavor is sweet and earthy, the texture soft and almost buttery. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the warmth settle. Nearby, a man sells small portions of what he proudly calls travel pudding, basically bread soaked in broth, fat and spices, until it becomes a kind of dense, savory snack brick. It's unique, heavy, strange, but oddly satisfying, the kind of thing medieval travelers would nibble on during long walks between towns. Finally, as you round the edge of the market, you notice a quiet little stand selling dried plums, prunes, really. But medieval folks loved them. They were sweet, chewy, good for digestion, and easy to carry. You pop one into your mouth. It's tart, sweet, and comforting in a way you didn't expect. As you stand there, chewing that last bite, listening to the soft murmur of evening settling over the city. You feel a slow exhale work its way through you. This medieval world, chaotic, loud, unpredictable, has little islands of gentleness scattered everywhere, and most of them come wrapped in small bites of food. The streets are quieter now, the clamour of the main market fading into the soft murmur of people finishing their errands and heading home. You notice the warm glow of candlelight spilling from shop windows, flickering across rough-hewn doors and uneven cobblestones. Somewhere, a dog snores near a fire, and the faint smell of smoke curls in the evening air. You drift toward a small stall tucked under a low roof, where an elderly man carefully lifts a pan from a charcoal flame. Inside are golden, irregular blobs, tiny fried cakes, made from a mixture of grain, milk and honey. They aren't uniform, not by any modern standard, but that's part of the charm. Each one has its own personality, some crisp at the edges, some soft in the center, some dangerously close to caramelizing. You take one between your fingers, warm and slightly oily, and bite in. The sweetness is gentle, the texture oddly comforting, soft enough to melt slowly in your mouth, with a faint chewiness that reminds you of toffee without the guilt. The honey is subtle, not overpowering, allowing the grain itself to shine through. These little cakes are humble, unassuming, the kind of snack people eat because it's there, because it sustains them between meals, and because it reminds them that life can have small pockets of joy even when it's muddy and exhausting. Nearby, a woman stirs a thick, dark liquid in a large wooden bowl. She dips a spoon and hands a small portion to a child who grins as the sticky sweetness hits their tongue. This is treacle, molasses boiled down with fruit scraps, herbs, and whatever sugar was available. It's messy, sticky, and intensely flavorful. You dip a finger in and taste it smoky, sweet, a little bitter at the edges, warm and comforting despite its roughness. Children love it, adults tolerate it, and you realize that part of the appeal is simply its imperfection. A little further along, you spot roasted nuts piled high in woven baskets, walnuts, almonds, and hazelnuts, all roasted until their natural oils bring out a toasty fragrance. A young boy offers you a handful, crunchy, fragrant, slightly sweet, from a thin glaze of honey. They make you feel more awake and more relaxed at the same time. You chew slowly, letting each nut release its flavor, feeling that faint heat from the day settle into your chest. It's a comforting rhythm. Chew, savor, pause, breathe. And then there are the smaller, more curious treats. Seeds, roasted or honey-coated, tucked into small cloth pouches. You nibble a few and feel the subtle difference between them. Some crunchy, some softer, some with a faint bitterness that sharpens the sweetness of a honeyed chestnut nearby. These snacks are simple, practical, portable, the little joys that medieval people carried with them, silently brightening their long, muddy days. The sun has fully set now, and the town is cloaked in the warm, soft glow of lanterns and torchlight. You follow the aroma of something richer, deeper, warmer, almost hypnotic. It leads you to a stall selling spiced milk and small pastries. The milk is thick, gently boiled with honey and aromatic herbs like rosemary or sage. It steams in small wooden cups, and the vendor hands one to you. You take a sip and feel the warmth slide down your throat, spreading a gentle calm through your chest and arms. It's soothing, the kind of slow, careful comfort that makes your shoulders drop and your thoughts quiet. Next to the milk, golden pastries wait patiently. Some are stuffed with mashed apples, others with soft cheese. They're uneven, rustic, lovingly imperfect, edges slightly burnt, centers soft, almost collapsing. You pick one up and bite in. The warmth hits first, then the sweetness, then the faint savory undertone from the cheese or herbs. It's indulgent without trying too hard, simple without being plain. Every bite is a little meditation, a reminder that food in this world, even the simplest snack, carries its own calm, its own joy. A few steps away, roasted chestnuts bubble in small iron pans. You scoop a handful into a cloth, cracking open the shells with your fingers. Warm, earthy, slightly sweet. They feel like something the world was designed to hand you when you were tired and hungry. Children laugh as they chase each other between the lanterns, nibbling on the chestnuts, while adults stand nearby, savoring the quiet sweetness that comes after a long day. Then you notice fried cheese rolls, little balls of cheese, wrapped in thin dough and lightly fried in oil. The vendor drops them carefully into the pan, and they sizzle as the edges brown. You pick one up, warm and fragile, and bite in. Cheese melts against the dough, rich, salty, soft, satisfying. It's messy. It's indulgent. It's absurdly comforting. You can imagine, these were the snacks that kept people sane between hard labor, long walks, and the constant mud of medieval streets. Finally, at the very end of the alley, someone is selling dried fruit pastes, thick sheets of boiled fruit, pressed into squares, sweetened with honey, and dried until firm. You take one and bite into it slowly. Tart, chewy, pleasantly sticky, not a refined candy, not glossy or polished, but honest. A small, simple sweetness in a complicated world. As you stand there chewing, sipping your spiced milk, and watching the lanterns flicker, you realize a quiet truth. Medieval junk food wasn't flashy. It wasn't designed to impress. It existed to sustain, to comfort, to bring tiny sparks of pleasure into daily life. And right now, as you breathe in the soft air of this lamplit street, you feel a slow, gentle contentment settle over you. The town has grown quieter now, the earlier bustle of the market, replaced by the gentle rhythm of evening routines. Smoke curls lazily from chimneys, drifting into the cool air. You wander past half-timbered houses and low stone walls, following a faint sweet aroma that leads you to another cluster of medieval treats. This time, it's roasted grains, barley, oats, and wheat being tumbled over coals in shallow pans. The grains pop and hiss softly, filling the air with a warm, nutty scent that makes you slow your steps. You scoop a handful into a pouch, feeling the heat radiate against your palm, and chew slowly. Crunchy, slightly bitter, earthy in a way that feels grounding. The grains remind you that medieval snacks often served a purpose beyond flavor. They fueled the body, soothed the nerves, and gave people something steady to hold onto during long days. Nearby, a fisherman's wife roasts eel strips over an open flame. Long, silvery slices curl slightly as the heat hits, turning glossy and firm. You take one between your fingers and bite, chewy, salty, rich, with that unmistakable taste of the river. It's the kind of snack that makes you admire the resourcefulness of people who had to turn anything they caught into something edible. You nibble, letting the flavor linger. Children dart past with scraps of fruit or honey cakes, their laughter carrying faintly on the evening breeze. The scene feels oddly timeless. People snacking, talking, moving slowly through the cooling streets, carrying tiny moments of pleasure in their hands. A stall selling honey cakes draws your attention next. These are small, round pastries, lightly spiced with herbs or cinnamon, soft and fragrant. You take one warm from the pan. It melts in your mouth, sweetness mingling with the earthy flavor of coarse flour. Nearby, children press their noses to the counter, begging for a taste, and adults buy only one or two for themselves, savoring every bite. It's a reminder that snacks were a shared experience, a way to connect across age and station, even in a world where life was often hard and messy. Moving on, you notice a small crowd around a vendor selling fried pea balls, tiny green spheres, mashed, seasoned and deep-fried until golden. They're crunchy outside, soft inside, and strangely addictive. You pop one into your mouth and chew slowly, marveling at how something so simple can feel like a little miracle in your hands. People here eat, not for sophistication, but for warmth, energy and comfort. And as you wander past, tasting, breathing, observing, you feel the rhythm of the medieval evening sink into you, a gentle pulse of calm amidst ordinary life. Finally, you spot roasted hemp seeds in a little wooden bowl, earthy, nutty, slightly crunchy. They are tucked into cloth pouches and carried off as portable snacks. You pop a few into your mouth and feel their subtle energy lift you, just as it would have lifted anyone trekking home along muddy roads, hauling goods, or finishing chores. These are the small joys, the practical indulgences, the human moments that make life slightly more bearable. The sky deepens to a dusky blue, and lantern light glimmers across cobblestones that have been worn smooth by countless footsteps. You drift toward a quieter corner of town, drawn by the comforting aroma of baked goods and sweetened milk. A small stall offers spiced milk, boiled with honey and herbs like sage or rosemary. The vendor hands you a wooden cup, and as you sip, the warmth spreads gently through your chest and arms. The drink is smooth, soothing, a slow companion for a tired body, inviting you to pause and notice the calm in the moment. Chupati, next to the milk, tiny pastries rest on a tray, golden and rustic. Some filled with mashed apples, others with soft cheese, uneven and imperfect. You pick one up and bite in. The warmth hits first, then the sweetness, then the gentle tang of cheese, or the hint of herb. It's indulgent without needing to be fancy, simple without being plain. Each bite feels like a small meditation, a gentle reminder that even in a world of mud and labor, there are moments of quiet pleasure. Down the lane, roasted chestnuts bubble in iron pans. You take a handful, cracking open the shells to reveal the warm, soft flesh inside. The flavor is subtly sweet and earthy, melting in your mouth, a tactile reminder that some pleasures are best experienced slowly. Children laugh nearby, and adults lean on carts or low walls, enjoying the warmth of food and fire. The simplicity of it is oddly comforting. Humans have always sought warmth, sweetness, and nourishment in small, portable forms. Then you notice fried cheese rolls, cheese wrapped in thin dough, dropped into hot oil until crispy and golden. You bite in, and the warm cheese melts into the dough, salty and rich, comforting in its indulgence. It's messy, absurdly so, but somehow deeply satisfying. These snacks are the kind that carry people through long days of work or travel, little indulgences tucked into the rhythm of life. Finally, you come across dried fruit pastes, thick squares of boiled fruit, sweetened with honey, pressed until firm, chewy, fragrant and pleasantly sticky. They are not polished or glossy, but their flavor is honest and deeply satisfying. You chew slowly, letting each bite linger, and feel a small sense of calm descend. The lanterns flicker as you stand there, sipping your milk, tasting each snack, letting the smells and warmth settle around you. Medieval junk food wasn't flashy or uniform. It was practical, comforting, and quietly joyful, scattered across the day in little moments of pleasure. And as you take it all in, the warmth, the quiet, the shared humanity, you feel a gentle contentment begin to unfold, ready to carry you deeper into this sleepy, delicious world. You move farther from the heart of town now, letting the noise fade behind you, until only the soft crunch of gravel and the low hum of evening insects remain. Out here, the snacks are different, not market treats, but homemade comforts, tucked into daily life. You stop near a small cluster of cottages, where the smell of toasted grains drifts through an open window. Someone inside is roasting oatcakes over a flat stone, flipping them with slow, practiced motions. You peek inside long enough to accept a warm piece. It's simple, just oats, a bit of water, and a pinch of salt, but something is calming about it. The edges are crisp, the center soft, the flavor mild and earthy. It doesn't dazzle, but it settles gently in your mouth like a familiar melody. This is the sort of snack villagers made when there was nothing fancy to spare, a quiet food, a steady one you eat while staring into the fire, listening to someone hum a tune older than anyone alive. Wandering on, you pass a shepherd leading his flock home, a small cloth pouch swinging from his belt. Inside are roasted broad beans. He offers you a handful. They're crunchy, slightly charred, and satisfyingly hearty. You pop one into your mouth and chew slowly, feeling the flavor deepen with each bite. These beans are traveler's food, something that lasts, something portable, something that never fails to fill the gaps between meals. A little farther down the road, you notice two children, sitting under a tree, cracking open hazelnut shells with small stones. They hand you one, as a kind of silent invitation. You accept it, biting into the nutty, slightly sweet flavor. Their mother watches from the doorway, smiling softly, as if sharing food with a stranger is simply part of the fabric of everyday life. And maybe it was. In a world where comfort was scarce, sharing small snacks meant sharing warmth. You continue walking, and soon, you catch the faint aroma of something smoky and savory. Someone is grilling small strips of salted fish on skewers made from slender branches. The fish sizzles, turning firm and fragrant as the heat pulls out its oils. You take a piece between your fingers and taste it. Salty, smoky, just a little chewy. It lingers in your mouth, in a way that makes you walk slower, savoring the moment. Just before the road bends, an older woman stands beside a bubbling pot, stirring a thick, warm mixture. She ladles some into a wooden bowl and hands it to you. It's essentially porridge, but cooked down until it's thick enough to scoop up like dough, sweetened with a swirl of honey. It tastes like something made for comfort, not for show. You finish it slowly, letting the warmth settle into your chest. As the sky fades deeper into twilight, you realize that medieval junk food wasn't just found in markets or festivals. It lived in doorways, pouches, and quiet kitchens, where people worked long hours and craved small, soothing bites. And with each taste, you feel more connected to the sleepy rhythm of the world you're wandering through. The evening darkens into a deep blue velvet, and torchlight begins to flicker along the road. You follow the glow until you stumble into what feels like a small gathering. A handful of villagers sitting on stools, sharing food around a crackling fire. No music, no noise, no rush, just warmth and soft conversation. You step forward, and without hesitation, they invite you to join. On a wooden board in the center sits a collection of simple snacks. The first thing that catches your eye is a bowl of spiced chickpeas. They've been roasted until they're crisp, then tossed with herbs, and a pinch of something warming, maybe cumin, maybe pepper. You roll one between your fingers before biting down. Crunchy, earthy, comforting. You take another, then another, as the fire pops, and someone chuckles softly nearby. Next to the chickpeas is something more unusual. Little fried dough knots, twisted and dropped quickly into hot oil. They're dusted with a sprinkle of herbs, and just a hint of salt. You bite into one, and feel the soft center give way beneath the crisp shell. It tastes like bread that got impatient, and decided to be fun. Instead, a small, joyful experiment from someone who clearly wasn't afraid to play with their food. A man hands you a slice of baked cheese. It's a rustic block of curd, warmed until the edges crisp and the inside softens. When you bite in, it's creamy, salty, and somehow both subtle and bold at the same time. The kind of snack that feels like it was invented by accident. Someone left cheese too close to the fire and thought, actually, not bad. The young woman passes you a skewer of roasted root vegetables, carrots, parsnips, maybe a stray turnip, all cut into uneven pieces and held over the fire until they caramelize. You take one, blow gently on it, and taste sweet, smoky, soft at the center. It's not technically junk food, but out here, shared, casual, warm, it fits the moment perfectly. Then there's the surprise of the night. Honeyed oats pressed into small bars. They're sticky, nutty, and full of energy. You chew slowly, feeling them soften against your tongue. These were the medieval equivalent of a granola bar. Not fancy, but reliable. Something farmers stuffed in pockets or travelers kept in saddlebags. A snack designed for survival, but appreciated for its sweetness. You lean back, feeling the warmth of the fire and the easy rhythm of people sharing simple food in the dark. Nobody is rushing to go anywhere. Nobody is worried about anything beyond whose turn it is to hold the ladle next. There's a softness in the air, a kind of quiet contentment that settles around you in the glow of the flames. The night deepens, the stars spill across the sky, and the villagers keep passing the snacks around, each bite grounding you deeper in the slow pulse of medieval life, a world where even the smallest treats carried stories, comfort, and the gentle reminder that people have always found ways to savor the little things. The fire behind you grows softer as you continue your slow walk down the darkening road, the night stretching long and gentle. You pass under the silhouettes of trees, whose branches curl overhead like quiet guardians. The air smells faintly of damp earth and wood smoke, and somewhere in the distance you hear the low clatter of a doorway closing for the night. Your steps naturally fall into an unhurried rhythm, steady, soft, almost meditative. Up ahead, you see a small figure sitting by a wagon, illuminated by a single lantern, swinging lightly in the breeze. He's a peddler, with boxes and bags and bundles strapped everywhere on the wagon. On the ground, even hanging from a makeshift pole, he waves you closer with a smile that's missing a few teeth, but full of warmth. He opens one of his crates and reveals a collection of what he calls night snacks. They're made for travelers, he says. Things that don't spoil, don't crumble too easily, and don't weigh much. You pick up a small round ball that looks dusty but smells faintly sweet. It's a mixture of crushed oats, honey, and dried berries rolled together and left to harden. You take a bite. It's chewy, mildly sweet, and just dense enough to make you feel grounded. One of those snacks that keeps your stomach calm and your energy steady, perfect for nighttime walks or long watches under a moonlit sky. Next, he shows you a flat, hard wafer made from barley flour and flavored with fennel seeds. You crack a piece off and chew slowly. The flavor is subtle, earthy, and faintly herbal. It's not a celebration food, it's a steady companion, something to nibble while sitting by a fire or pacing a castle corridor on guard duty. He digs around and pulls out another item, what he calls cinder bites. These are small strips of dough, dipped in honey, and then rolled in something that might be crushed nuts, or might be something else entirely. The peddler shrugs when you ask. Depends on the season, he says, cheerfully. You try one anyway. Sweet, crunchy, a little smoky from being dried near a fire. Surprisingly good. Then he proudly presents his most popular item, candied ginger. Slices of ginger are boiled in honey until translucent, then left to harden slightly. You bite into one and feel that familiar tingle, warm, sharp, sweet, the kind of flavor that clears your head and wakes up your senses just enough. Medieval people used ginger as medicine, spice, and treat all at once. You understand why. As you snack, the peddler talks about the road where it leads, who has passed by, the foods they carried. You realize that medieval junk food traveled with people, becoming part of the story of every journey. You take another small wafer and tuck it into your pouch before thanking the peddler and moving on. The lantern light fades behind you, swallowed by the dark, but your steps feel easier, steadier. Something is calming about a world where even the late-night snacks are simple, honest, and gently sustaining. As you walk into the quiet, you breathe deeper, feeling the night settle into your bones. You continue along the road until you reach a cluster of small houses that form a tiny hamlet, just a handful of families living close together, sharing chores, gossip, and food. A few lanterns glow in the windows, and you hear low voices drifting through the chilled air. Someone laughs, softly. Someone else shushes them. Life is winding down for the night, but not entirely. You pass a house where an older man sits on a stool, peeling something slowly. When he notices you, he holds up a piece, roasted turnip slices. Best before bed, he says proudly. He hands you one, still warm. You bite in, expecting, well, turnip. And yes, it's turnip, but sweetened by the roasting, soft, a little caramelized, surprisingly pleasant. You nod, and the man beams, as if he invented the concept of roasting vegetables. A few steps later, you smell something sweet and floral. A woman is crushing violets in a small bowl with honey, creating a syrupy paste she spreads onto thin pieces of bread. You taste one. The sweetness is mellow, the floral note light and soothing. Medieval people loved edible flowers. They added color, scent, and a touch of elegance to otherwise simple foods. This is the kind of treat eaten on spring evenings, when the world is soft and smells of new life. Nearby, a young boy sits cross-legged on the ground, turning a little spit over a candle flame. On it, are tiny skewers of dried mushrooms brushed with a bit of oil. They hiss quietly when he turns them. You try one, chewy, savory, with a hint of smoke. This is a humble snack, the kind born from gathering what the forest gives freely. It's grounding, earthy, almost meditative. Around the corner, a woman is pouring something thick and warm into shallow clay bowls. It's almond milk. Not the modern mass-produced kind, but hand-ground almonds mixed with water, strained, heated, and sweetened with honey. You sip slowly. It's creamy in a medieval way, grainy, slightly nutty, comforting. People drank this when they wanted something gentle that wouldn't sit heavily in the stomach. Perfect for the end of the day. A moment later, someone offers you small baked pear slices sprinkled with a dusting of ginger. Soft, fragrant, almost buttery. Pears were a beloved fruit, and when baked, they became a treat that tasted like warmth itself. You chew slowly, letting the flavor melt across your tongue. Then you meet a group of children sharing something mysterious from a bowl. They offer you a piece. It's dried bread, soaked in spiced wine, then toasted again until crisp. The flavor is deep, warm spices, tangy wine, a hint of sweetness. It's messy, unpredictable, and strangely delightful. The kind of snack that happens when you have leftover bread and a bit of curiosity. As you leave the hamlet, carrying the last traces of ginger and honey on your tongue, you feel the night opening again around you. The sky above you is star-filled and gentle. The road beneath your feet is soft with years of footsteps, and your body feels warm, comfortable, quietly nourished by the simple, thoughtful snacks shared freely along the way. You follow the winding road until it narrows into a path lined with low stone walls. Moss grows thick on the edges, softening every hard line. The night is neither cold nor warm, just perfectly still. You hear the distant croak of a frog, then silence again. Medieval nights weren't filled with the constant hum of machines. Just small sounds, each one noticeable, each one somehow calming. As you walk, you spot a small building tucked behind a grove of trees. A mill, its water wheel turning slowly in the moonlight. A faint glow spills from a cracked door, and curiosity leads you inside. The miller's family is still awake, working through what they call the last grind of the night. But really, they're snacking. A lot. The miller's wife offers you something that looks like a biscuit, but smells savory barley cakes studded with onions. You take a bite, soft in the center, crisp on the edges, filled with that comforting sweetness. Onions get only when they've been cooked slow and patient. This is the kind of snack medieval families would eat before bed, especially after long days hauling grain and turning millstones. It's not glamorous, but it's satisfying in a way that reaches right into your bones. A teenager sitting near the fire is making something he calls pan scrapings. Basically, when they fry something earlier, pancakes, cakes, dough bits, they save the crispy leftover bits from the pan. He reheats them, sprinkles a pinch of salt, and hands you a warm handful. They're crunchy, salty, a little greasy, basically medieval kettle chips. You can't help but smile. Humans have always loved the crispy bits. Beside him, a little girl is stretching a sticky, shiny piece of something between her fingers. Honey taffy. She heated honey until bubbling, then quickly stirred it and let it cool until thick and pliable. She breaks off a piece for you. It's sweet, warm, and sticks to your teeth in a way you know will haunt you later, but it's worth it. A simple joy made with nothing more than patience and a sweet tooth. The miller himself brings out roasted chickpeas. They're crunchy, a bit smoky, and seasoned with whatever herbs happen to be nearest the door. A perfect handful snack for late-night work or long winter evenings. You throw a few into your mouth and enjoy the satisfying crunch. Before you leave, they offer warm ale, barely warmed, really just enough to take the chill off. You sip politely. It's not exactly delicious, but it's comforting in a way that makes sense once you've been walking in the dark. Medieval people weren't picky. They looked for warmth, calm, and something mild enough to drink without thinking too hard. You thank the family and step back outside. The sound of the water wheel blends with the night air, creating a steady rhythm behind you. You walk on, feeling the warmth of onion cakes and chickpeas settling into your body. Everything tonight feels slower, softer, and somehow deeply human. The road brings you to a small bridge crossing a narrow stream. Water trickles softly beneath it, reflecting silver in the moonlight. On the other side stands a modest tavern, just one room, one chimney, one door, hanging slightly crooked. You hear low chatter from inside, the kind of relaxed voices people use when they're tired, but not quite ready for sleep. When you push open the door, warm air and the smell of herbs hit you immediately. A few villagers sit around a long wooden table, sharing food that looks like a mix of leftovers and comfort snacks. The innkeeper waves you over with a soft smile, as if you've been expected. The first thing she offers is a tiny bowl of salted herbs, sage, thyme, marjoram, mixed with crumbs of bread. They call it herb nibble. You pinch a bit and taste it. Salty, aromatic, strangely addictive, a medieval version of flavored crumbs, eaten in small bites while people talked about the weather or their aching backs. Next, she brings out something that genuinely surprises you. Small bits of fried dough made from ale batter, light, airy, slightly tangy. You pop one into your mouth, and it dissolves into soft warmth. These are the kind of treats taverns made when the batter bowl wasn't quite empty. Never waste good batter, the innkeeper says proudly. Then someone slides over a plate of spiced carrots, thin slices roasted until almost caramelized, sprinkled with a little honey and pepper. You try one. Sweet, warm, and far tastier than you expect carrots to be at night. Carrots were one of the few vegetables medieval people could rely on through winter, so turning them into snacks was practically a lifestyle. A man in the corner lifts a bowl toward you, offering dried apple rings, thin slices strung and hung near a hearth for days, sometimes weeks. You take one, chewy, softly sweet, with the taste of a whole season compressed into a single bite. You imagine children carrying these while walking miles to the next village. The innkeeper brings out something else, a bowl of warm milk flavored with nutmeg. You sip it slowly. It's soothing, creamy, almost dreamlike, a bedtime drink that medieval people swore by. Something about the warmth, the spice, the softness of it all makes your shoulders loosen. Then she presents the final offering of the night. Tiny savory pastries filled with leeks and herbs, barely larger than your thumb. You bite into one, and the flavor unfolds gently. Sweet, leek, soft dough, a hint of salt. Their comfort in miniature. The tavern buzz grows quieter as the night deepens. You sit among them, taking small bites, listening to murmured stories. The weather, the harvest, the neighbor who borrowed a pot and definitely won't return it. The room warms you, the food steadies you. The slow pace of everything around you invites your breath to lengthen. When you finally step back into the night, the door creaks softly behind you. The world feels cooler again, but your body is warm, your mind calmer. You walk on, guided by moonlight, carrying the memory of simple foods shared in a quiet room where time seemed to pause just for you. Picture a long, quiet road, stretching between two market towns. The kind of path that winds through open fields, skims the edge of small forests, and dips into shallow valleys, where mist sits like spilled milk. Travelers along these routes often carried small pouches or cloth bundles tied to their belts. Inside them, medieval on the go snacks, the ancestors of modern trail mix and granola bars, though they would have laughed at those names. One of the most common road snacks was marchpane crumbs, broken pieces of almond paste left over from wealthier households, or purchased cheaply from confectioners. These crumbs were dense, sweet, and high in energy. If you were lucky enough to have even a handful, you'd ration them carefully, savoring little bursts of almond and honey on long stretches of road where nothing else happened for hours. Unlike the rock-hard naval versions that come later in history, these were somewhat edible. They were dry as dust, mildly sweetened, and often flavored with anise or fennel seeds. You would chew them slowly, partly to pass the time, partly because if you rushed you might chip a tooth. The roads themselves carried their own quiet rhythm, birds swooping overhead, farmers calling out to each other across fields, a cart creaking somewhere behind you, and you occasionally nibbling on something small to keep your energy up. Dried berries were another companion of the medieval traveler. Raspberries, black currants and elderberries. Their flavors were sharp, tannic, and sometimes sour enough to make your eyes water, but they kept well, and they offered little sparks of flavor in an otherwise silent journey. If you stumbled upon a roadside vendor, an old woman with a donkey cart, perhaps, you might find a few rare indulgences: fried cheese curds sprinkled with herbs, little honeycomb fragments sold cheaply because they'd broken off the main block, even roasted chickpeas, crunchy and seasoned with whatever salt or spices she had on hand. Snacking wasn't a constant habit like it is today. It was sparse, deliberate, almost ceremonial, a pause in the long rhythm of walking, a reminder that even a small comfort could brighten a difficult journey, and as the sky begins to dim, you tuck your last few treats away, listening to the gentle hush of evening settling over the medieval countryside, where even the smallest snack carries a whisper of home comfort and a momentary escape from the long, uneven road beneath your feet. Evening in a medieval village was a slow-turning thing. No electric lights, no flickering screens, no rush of late-night errands, just the steady dimming of the sky, the rising smell of hearth fires, and the soft, domesticated chaos of dinner time. And among all that, yes, even more opportunities for medieval junk food, though nobody called it that. Evening snacks were often tied to chores, leftovers, or tiny luxuries people carved out of long days. Let's start with evening fritters. These weren't dessert in the modern sense. They were more like improvised, end-of-day comfort food. Someone might slice an onion thinly, dredge it in coarse flour, and fry it in a spoonful of animal fat, crispy, savory, and pleasantly greasy, perfect for nibbling while sitting near the fire. Children loved them, adults pretended not to. Then there was the simple sweetness of baked apples, not the fancy versions stuffed with nuts and spices, but just apples placed near the fire until their skins blistered and their insides softened into warm pulp. If the house happened to have a scrap of honey or a dusting of cinnamon, it became a small feast. If not, it was still a treat. Nature's candy warmed by the coals. In some homes, especially those near forests, toasted nuts became the evening ritual. Chestnuts, hazelnuts, and walnuts roasted slowly in pans with tiny air vents. They'd pop and hiss, and the smell, earthy, warm, slightly smoky, would drift through the entire cottage. A handful of warm nuts could feel like the end of a long day agreeing to finally relax. Evenings brought social snacking too. If neighbours gathered, someone would usually bring a small contribution. A bit of leftover cheese, a clutch of dried figs, a piece of coarse bread softened in warm ale. A combination that sounds questionable to us, but to them it was soothing, even sleep-inducing. Speaking of ale, it played its own role. A cup of weak ale, warm and lightly flavoured with herbs, was considered calming, like a medieval bedtime tea. People sipped it slowly, while sharing small bites of whatever remained from the day's meals. But the most surprising evening snack was fire-warmed cheese, a sort of proto-grilled cheese without the bread. A wedge of cheese held near the fire until it softened, then scooped up with a piece of bread, or simply eaten with a knife. It was rich, melty, and comforting, a reward for surviving the day. As the fire crackled and shadows stretched across the walls, these small snacks became part of the rhythm of winding down, slow, simple, and deeply human. A reminder that even in a world without modern treats, people still reached for small comforts at the end of the day, warm, familiar, and quietly satisfying. Late at night, when most of the village had gone quiet, the world slipped into a softer rhythm, the kind where sound travels differently, more slowly, more gently, as if wrapped in wool. And in that quiet, there existed a category of medieval food that we might call midnight snacks, though again nobody then would have used that phrase. They didn't stay up late in the way we understand it, but there were moments when someone woke in the night, tended to a fire, checked on an animal, or soothed a restless child. And in those small stretches of wakefulness, A little snack wasn't unheard of. The most common nighttime nibble was simply leftover bread soaked in warm milk or ale. It sounds plain, and it was. But in a world where sweet, soft foods were rare, this felt almost indulgent. The warmth soothed the stomach, eased the nerves, and helped people fall back asleep. Think of it as the medieval version of a mug of cocoa. There were also small spice cakes, baked earlier in the day, and kept near the hearth to dry out slightly. They weren't sugary, sugar was too precious, but they carried whispers of nutmeg or ginger, and the dried fruit inside offered subtle bursts of sweetness in the middle of the night. If someone woke from a bad dream or found themselves staring into the dark with too many thoughts, nibbling a piece of spice cake could help pass those strange shadowy hours. Another nighttime staple was curds with honey. Not much honey, just a thread of gold across the surface. This was a treat that required only a spoon and a quiet corner. The curds were cool, mild and comforting. The honey lifted them into something soothing. A tired parent rocking a fussy toddler would often share a small spoonful, both of them calming at the same time. Winter nights brought another kind of snack, ember-charred root slices. Someone would wrap thin slices of turnip or parsnip in damp cloth and tuck them near the edge of the hearth to soften. Hours later, when the room was dark except for the glowing coals, those slices could be eaten warm and smoky, with a sweetness that only comes from slow heat. And then there was the humble hearth cake, a simple mixture of flour and water pressed between hot stones. Not flavorful, not exciting, but warm. And warmth was a luxury in the middle of a cold medieval night. You could hold it in your hands like a tiny edible heater, then eat it when it cooled. These nighttime snacks were small, practical, almost meditative. They belonged to that liminal world between sleep and wakefulness, where time feels slow and the mind drifts. A world where even the simplest food tastes different, softer, gentler, as if the quiet itself adds flavor. And when the last bite was gone, people slipped back under rough wool blankets, listening to the crackle of the fading fire, letting the warmth of food and hearth pull them back into sleep. If we shift the scene to the bustling heart of a medieval town, we find an entirely different world of snacks. The quick bites sold on street corners, at festivals, or outside taverns. These were the closest equivalents to modern fast food, though fast was simply a consequence of necessity, not design. Let's start with the tavern stalls. Outside many taverns, especially in busy districts, vendors sold hot rolls stuffed with cheese or onions. The cheese oozed slightly when warmed, and the onions softened into a sweet, fragrant filling. These rolls were cheap, filling, and perfect for someone who had spent a little too long inside the tavern and needed something solid before wobbling home. Another street delicacy was griddle bread. People sprinkled it with a pinch of salt, dipped it in leftover stew, or ate it plain while walking through narrow streets. More surprising, perhaps, are the savory meat scraps. Butchers weren't allowed to waste anything, so they often sold grilled bits of fat, cartilage, or meat trimmings for a few coins. These were skewered on small sticks and roasted over open flames. Crunchy, salty, and intensely flavorful, they were beloved by workers finishing long shifts. During festivals, street food is transformed entirely. Picture long tables crowded with honeyed barley cakes, sticky, chewy, and fragrant, fried fish, bites, served with herbs, roasted apples, rolling in bowls of warm spices, crispy dough, twists dusted with crumbs or seeds. Enter the smells. Oh, the smells. Those smoke from cooking pits. Sweet spices drifting like invisible ribbons through the air. The yeasty scent of freshly pulled bread. 100 mingling aromas that were impossible to ignore. Children ran around with pop seeds. Little pouches of toasted barley kernels that popped softly when heated. Adults sipped warm spiced ale and nibbled on fried cheese curds, laughing with neighbors. Street food created a sense of community. Even strangers paused shoulder to shoulder at stalls, choosing small treats that fit the moment. A warm roll on a cold evening, a piece of fried dough to celebrate a saint's day, a salty meat scrap before returning to work. These foods weren't extravagant. They were simple, quick, comforting, and deeply tied to the rhythm of medieval town life, the kind of food eaten standing up, leaning against door frames, walking home, or sharing casually with a friend. And in every bite, there was a familiarity, a reminder that even centuries ago, people loved the same things we do: warmth, flavor, convenience, and that tiny spark of joy when hunger is met with something delicious. As the sun dips low over the countryside, you walk through a quieter, more rural corner of the medieval world, the kind of place where snacks weren't bought, but made, traded, or tucked into aprons as someone hurried between chores. Out here, food wasn't just food, it was survival wrapped in simplicity. And yet, people still found ways to turn scraps and harvest leftovers into small moments of comfort. The most common countryside snack was the humble oat cake, not the modern, sweet, chewy kind. These were thin, sturdy, and a little rough around the edges. Farmers mixed oats with water, maybe a pinch of salt if they had it, and flattened the mixture onto hot stones or battered pans. The result? A crisp, dry cake that lasted days and travelled well in pockets or satchels. When eaten warm, it had a gentle, nutty flavour that made the long hours in the fields a little more bearable. Then there were berry mash balls, essentially early granola bites, made from mashed berries, crushed nuts if you were lucky, and leftover grain. They were shaped into small lumps and dried near the fire. Kids adored them. Adults pretended not to. They were sticky, messy, and stained everyone's fingers purple, but they were delicious in a way only wild berries can be. You wander past a farmhouse and notice something interesting: fried leek strips. These weren't a daily snack, but when oil was available and leeks were in season, villagers sliced them into ribbons and pan-fried them until crisp. Think of them as medieval veggie chips, salty, papery, and weirdly satisfying for something that grew out of the ground with such stubborn determination. Women working near the hearth sometimes made quick-drop doughs. They'd scoop spoonfuls of rough dough onto hot plates, creating lumpy little biscuits. No sugar, no fancy flavors. But when eaten straight from the fire, they were soft, warm, and comforting in a way only fresh bread can be. Village children often gathered near hedgerows to nibble on hawberries, rose hips, or sloe berries. They weren't exactly sweet, more tart than anything, but they gave small bursts of flavor during breaks from chores or games. A handful of these fruits could brighten an entire afternoon, especially during long months before harvest. Evening brought one more countryside treat: warm milk with herbs. Villagers sometimes infused milk with mint, chamomile, or fennel seeds, creating a soothing drink for the end of the day. It worked like medieval melatonin, calming, warm, and perfect before sleep. And as you walk back along the dirt path, pockets a little heavier with crumbs, you hear laughter from a group of neighbors sharing freshly roasted beans, crackly, salty, and eaten straight from the pan. Nothing fancy, just small bits of joy scattered through the rhythm of rural life. Now, shift your mind to a monastery, a place of stillness, discipline, and schedules carved with almost mathematical precision. Monks weren't exactly the medieval version of street food enthusiasts, but they did have snacks. Quiet ones, simple ones. The kind of snacks eaten slowly, thoughtfully, almost reverently. You wander through a cloister garden first. The air smells of earth, herbs, and damp stone. Here, monks cultivated the ingredients for their most common treats: herb wafers, made from thin sheets of dough infused with rosemary, mint, or lavender. These wafers were crisp, fragrant, and calming. They weren't meant to be indulgent. They were meant to settle the stomach and encourage peaceful thoughts. Then there was the famous monastic standby, bread dipped in spiced wine, not a party drink, but a controlled, modest portion. The bread softened in the wine, absorbing warmth and flavor. This was a rare treat during certain feast days. offering a surprising sweetness from the spices, cinnamon, cloves, cardamom, all added sparingly but lovingly. A more everyday monastery snack was fig paste. Dried figs were mashed into a thick, dark spread and pressed into small wooden molds. These fig blocks were dense and chewy, perfect for long hours of copying manuscripts, where you needed steady focus and something quick to nibble without leaving crumbs all over precious parchment. You pass the kitchen and smell roasted nuts, almonds when available, hazelnuts more commonly. Monks roasted them slowly over low heat, stirring constantly to prevent burning. They ate them in small handfuls during seasonal fasts, adding much needed energy to otherwise simple meals. During winter, monks occasionally treated themselves to warm barley pudding. It wasn't sweet, like modern pudding. Think of it more like a warm, soft grain mush. But when flavoured with a bit of honey, or a fleeting pinch of saffron, it became a rare luxury, something to savour in silent contemplation, letting the warmth travel down the chest like a small, edible prayer. Some monasteries even made tiny fruit tarts, especially in regions with abundant orchards. These tarts were miniature, barely 2 bites, filled with spiced pear or apple. They were served on feast days with careful moderation. You can picture a monk taking a slow, thoughtful nibble, as if evaluating the theological meaning of pastry. And finally, perhaps the most charming monastic snack, the travel biscuit. Monks baked these dry, compact biscuits for journeys, but they often kept a few on hand for late-night work or early morning vigils. When softened with a few drops of warm milk, they became edible little comforts in the quiet hours. Walking through the monastery, you feel a soft peace settle around you. The snacks here weren't about indulgence or excitement. They were about warmth, calm, and staying steady through long days of work and prayer. And somehow, that simplicity, that gentle restraint, feels incredibly soothing. As you wander away from the monastery's calm stone arches, you step into another world entirely. The kitchens of medieval castles, loud, bustling, smoky, chaotic, and gloriously unpredictable. If monasteries offered snacks for the soul, castles offered snacks for, well, everyone else. Servants, guards, cooks, stable boys, visiting nobles, traveling merchants, all moving through an enormous space, designed to feed an army. Castle snacks fell into 2 categories, planned and opportunistic. Planned snacks were prepared intentionally, usually for servants working long hours. Opportunistic snacks were whatever someone could sneak, borrow, slice, or scoop when the cook wasn't looking. One of the most prized bites was the pan scrap. When cooks baked massive trays of bread or roasted enormous slabs of meat, little edges and drippings stuck to the pans. These crispy, salty bits were scraped off and shared among workers. Guards on night duty favoured cheese heels, the hardened edges of cheese wheels, not glamorous, not soft, not even particularly tasty, but they lasted forever, held up in cold weather, and gave a satisfying chew when your main entertainment at 2 a.m. was listening to the wind whistle through arrow slits. Then there were spiced crumbs, found mostly in wealthier castles. After large feasts, servants swept the tablecloths and collected edible leftovers, crumbs soaked in wine or gravy, fragments of pastry, bits of fruit. These were pressed together into little balls and eaten quickly before they dried out. Strange, yes, but surprisingly delicious. In a castle bakery, a different kind of treat awaited honey-scorched crusts. Bakers coated some loaves with thin layers of honey to help them brown evenly. The excess dripped off and congealed into shiny sheets on the oven floor. Once cooled, these brittle caramel-like pieces were snapped apart like medieval candy. Meanwhile, kitchen boys loved fat-fried herbs, rosemary, sage, thyme, tossed into hot fat for a brief sizzle until crisp. The result was aromatic, salty, and dangerously addictive. You could eat an entire handful before realizing someone in charge was calling your name with a tone, suggesting you shouldn't be eating that. During banquets, castle staff got their own little feast of leftovers, pie trimmings, mini donuts, and even hand pies filled with whatever scraps needed using. Onions, leeks, bits of meat, mashed legumes. Hard-working, underpaid, constantly moving people needed calories, and they took them wherever they could find them. Even nobles had their own form of casual snacking. Small imported candied fruits, for example. Oranges, lemons, quince, dipped in syrup and dried until jewel-like. These were expensive, delicate, and absolutely hoarded by whoever had access to them. Yet the most charming castle snack was the warming stone biscuit. Bakers would place thin biscuits on warmed stones near the massive hearth. These biscuits soaked up heat slowly, becoming soft, fragrant and pleasant to chew while wandering chilly castle corridors. Castle snacks had a shared quality. They tasted best when stolen or earned. Every bite felt like a secret, something taken between duties, grabbed during rushes, or shared in quiet corners. Little edible rewards that made long, demanding days a bit more bearable. Now, let's drift into a world many medieval people knew intimately. The workshop. Blacksmiths, carpenters, weavers, potters, masons. Each trade had its own rhythms, tools, smells, and snacks. Because workdays were long, breaks were short, and eating needed to be quick and practical. Blacksmiths preferred snacks with staying power. Think dense bread rolls, hard cheese chunks, and salty cured scraps that didn't spoil in heat. In the corner of nearly every forge sat a wooden box with these essentials, warmed slightly by the glowing coals. Blacksmiths would take tiny bites between hammer strikes, never fully stepping away from their work. Carpenters often kept seed cakes. These were small rounds of flour, water, and crushed seeds, usually flax or poppy, baked until firm. They traveled well, didn't leave crumbs that attracted animals, and delivered slow, steady energy. Sometimes carpenters dipped them in thin ale to soften them. Practical and slightly bitter, a perfect metaphor for medieval woodworking. Weavers and spinners favored dried fruit slivers. Thin strips of apple, pear, or plum hung near windows to dry. They were light, easily stored, and safe to pick at, while working without leaving greasy fingerprints on delicate fibers. Imagine someone spinning a spindle with one hand while nibbling patiently, a kind of multitasking older than clocks. Stonemasons enjoyed something heartier, crushed barley bites, essentially proto-energy bars made from barley flour, mixed with honey and pressed into compact cakes, dense enough to break a toe if dropped. But they lasted forever, resisted moisture, and packed enough calories to keep someone lifting stones the size of furniture. Potters had their own favorite sweetened grain mash. A small pot of mashed grains mixed with herbs or a bit of honey sat near the kiln. When potters took breaks from shaping or firing clay, they scooped a bite or two with their fingers. It tasted warm, earthy, and slightly sticky, remarkably comforting during long hours of repetitive work. Cobblers, always surrounded by scraps of leather and bits of thread, leaned toward tiny bread knots. These were small, twisted rolls, baked to be firm and portable. They didn't crumble, didn't spoil quickly, and didn't get in the way. You could tuck one behind a tool chest and forget about it until hunger reminded you. And then there was the universal workshop favorite, roasted peas and nuts. Tossed in a little salt when available, and roasted over any available flame, these were shared among workers in a gesture of camaraderie. They rattled around in pockets, bowls, and tool bags. Crunchy, satisfying, and endlessly snackable. Workshop snacks were never luxurious. They were fuel, meant to make the day smoother, the work lighter, the hours shorter. But in a quiet, humble way, they connected workers. Sharing a handful of roasted peas or passing around a fruit sliver wasn't just about hunger. It was about community, a tiny reminder that no one worked alone. You leave the workshop district behind and follow the winding path toward the medieval marketplace, the true heartbeat of any town. It's noisy, unpredictable, chaotic in the best way, and bursting with the scent of everything from fresh herbs to questionable fish. If there was ever a place where medieval people indulged their curiosity, cravings, and spontaneous hunger, it was here. Market snacks weren't subtle. They were bold, fragrant, sometimes risky, and designed to catch your attention before you even had time to consider whether you wanted them. One of the most popular was the honey twist. Bakers rolled thin strands of dough, twisted them into spirals, fried them in bubbling fat, and dunked them in warm honey. These were bright, sticky, and messy, the kind of snack that glued your fingers together and guaranteed a trail of delighted children following you around. Then, there were the pepper biscuits, not sweet, sharp, peppery, warming. These biscuits woke you up like a medieval espresso shot. Merchants swore by them on cold mornings, munching them between bargaining sessions. Fruit sellers often handed out warm pear slices, simmered in tiny pots over small coals. These weren't heavily spiced. Spices were expensive, but the natural sweetness of pear, heated until soft and fragrant, felt almost luxurious. Cheese vendors sold crumbled cheese cones, essentially small folded leaves or parchment cones, filled with crumbled sharp cheese. Simple, salty, immediate. Market-goers ate them while wandering through stalls, filled with shouting merchants and bleating animals. And if you wanted something even more portable, there were grain bites, tightly pressed clumps of barley stuck together with honey or mashed dates. They were dense, slightly chewy, and perfect for long shopping trips. Meat sellers offered tiny roast bites, slices of leftover roast meat, warmed over small flames. These were savory, juicy, and popular among travelers who didn't have time to sit for a meal. More than one hungry villager probably burned their tongue on these, because patience was not the dominant medieval virtue. Fishmongers got creative too. They fried minnows, yes, whole little fish, until crisp and golden. These were eaten like chips, crunchy, salty, surprisingly addictive, and probably the source of many "are you sure that was safe?" moments. But the star of the marketplace was the tiny hand pie. These were everywhere, stuffed with vegetables, onions, bits of cheese, or scraps of meat, cheap, filling, and shaped to fit perfectly into one hand, while the other carried baskets, tools, or children. Street food at its medieval finest, and the chatter that filled the marketplace, bargaining, laughter, gossip, somehow made every bite taste better. Snacks weren't just food here, they were part of the rhythm, part of the experience of being human in a lively, noisy, wonderfully chaotic world. As the day fades into a soft blue evening, you wander into a different kind of medieval gathering. The tavern, loud, warm, slightly smoky, endlessly social, and always full of snacks that were designed with exactly two goals: keep people happy and keep them drinking. The first tavern staple was hot barley cakes. Not sweet, not fancy, but incredibly comforting, served warm, with a pat of melting fat, or a smear of herbs. They were filling enough to coat the stomach before another drink. Then came the salted bean bowls. These were simple, roasted broad beans, sprinkled generously with salt, crunchy, addicting, and dangerous because once you started, you couldn't stop. Medieval people didn't have peanuts, but they absolutely understood bar snacks. One of the tavern favorites was griddle-fried cheese squares, thick slabs of cheese tossed onto hot iron plates until the edges crisped and the inside melted, eaten quickly before they cooled. Gooey, sizzling, deeply satisfying. Tavern cooks also loved making legume fritters, ground peas or beans mixed with herbs, fried until golden, and served with a drizzle of vinegar. These were cheap to produce and wildly popular among guests who needed something solid after hours of singing loudly off-key. If you were feeling daring, you might try the pickled egg. Taverns kept jars of eggs soaking in vinegar and spices. They were strong, tangy enough to make your eyes water, flavorful enough to make you take another bite anyway. Taverns also served warm ale bread slices, thick bread toasted over open flames, and brushed with ale before serving. The ale soaked in, adding a malty sweetness that paired perfectly with music and laughter. And then you notice a bowl of herbed root chips, thin slices of turnip or parsnip fried until crisp and tossed with crushed herbs. Earthy, crunchy, a little greasy, exactly what you want after a long day. But the most iconic tavern snack was meat on a stick. Small pieces of leftover meat, threaded onto skewers, roasted over the tavern's central fire. then handed out hot enough to steam in the cool night air. Simple, satisfying, and always eaten too fast. As we reach the end of tonight's quiet journey, let everything around you soften, let the room settle into its own stillness, and feel your breath move a little slower, as if even your body understands it's time to drift. You've wandered through forgotten kitchens, medieval markets, and the dusty corners of history where small stories hide, the ones most people never think about. And yet, somehow, they always feel familiar. Or almost comforting. Imagine the world outside dimming like a lantern with its flame turned low. The air grows warmer, heavier, gentler. Somewhere far away, a soft breeze moves through an empty street, carrying nothing urgent, just the sound of a day quietly ending. Let that same feeling wash over you. No rush, no expectations, just this moment. Your thoughts may come and go, rising and sinking like tiny boats on a still harbor. Let them, you don't have to follow any of them. Let them drift away on their own. Tonight is not for thinking. Tonight is for resting. Feel the weight of your body melt just a little deeper into where you're lying. Shoulders soften, jaw loosens, fingers fall into stillness. Even the air around you seems to pause, giving you permission to do absolutely nothing at all. If sleep arrives now, let it pull you gently under. If not, simply rest in the quiet. Both are enough. But simply rest in the quiet. Both are enough. And remember, history will wait for you. The stories, the characters, the forgotten lives, they'll be here whenever you return. For now, allow the calm to wrap around you like a warm blanket, steady and safe. You've wandered far enough for one night. Close your eyes. Breathe, rest,